Okay, so we pulled out of some places that we should have never been in to begin with. Places where our soldiers did such horrible things that they have killed themselves at a higher rate than the enemy. That's right, American soldiers killed themselves at a higher rate than the enemy did. And now, when we pulled out of there, we probably should have taken our equipment with us, but we didn't. Instead, we armed the Taliban. Yay! We're doing a great job, aren't we? Policing the world and all that. Here in the United States, well, we're trying to disarm our populace, aren't we? Now, we have seen what happens to the most disarmed populations in our country. They get victimized over and over and over again. That's the problem with the United States. They only understand the gun, they only understand violence. They breed it. It's all about hating people. You didn't get your Prada backpack? Well, you might as well go take it off on some homeless people because nobody cares about them. You know what? Nobody cares about your fucking Prada backpack either. You know that chances are, if a homeless person is armed, it's probably with a knife. And that homeless person is probably not using that knife as a weapon. When you've had to live homeless, you've had to seek shelter in that kind of environment, well, you realize that your knife is a very useful tool. It's useful for cutting the lanyards you need and cutting the ropes you need when you need to set up your tent, need to stake it down, or when you got to make your own shelter off in the woods. But here we are, we're trying to disarm the American populace, specifically the broke American populace. See, if you're a rich person and you spend $20,000, you can own a full auto machine gun, just like the Marine Corps, just like the Army. You can own a full auto machine gun if you have $20,000. Well, that right there, I think, would make them a self indulgent weenie. We don't have the arms required to defend ourselves against our own government. We don't have the arms required to defend ourselves against our own soldiers. And our own soldiers have been called in time and time again to suppress the American people, even when they're not armed. We want to keep changing the rules. The United States didn't just arm the Taliban. The United States armed their enemies and their opponents. You might think of that as a good thing. You know, the whole saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, no. No, they're not. Most of these nations hate us more than they hate the Taliban. And we armed them. We don't want our own citizens to have guns, but we're fine with hundreds of thousands of guns going into the hands of the Taliban. And not just the Taliban. The United States is the largest human trafficker on the planet. Get that through your heads. Americans need guns. And not the self-indulgent weenies either, but the people who are actually going to stand up and fight for our fucking rights. It's not okay to go over to your neighbor's house and kill him. That's wrong, obviously. But if your neighbor breaks into your house with a shotgun and starts shooting at you, by all means, defend yourself however you possibly can. Now, we all know that the laws concerning guns in this country do not apply to criminals. They don't. You can make it as impossible to get a gun as you want, criminals are still going to find them. People who want to harm others are still going to find guns. And then there are also a lot of good people in America who own guns, who never harmed anybody with their guns, never pointed their guns at anybody, and never threatened anybody with their guns. Yet we're trying to make it impossible for them to have guns. Most of the guys I know, if their kids are threatened, they'll find a gun, or they'll make a gun, or they'll simply beat the man to death with a baseball bat. A lot of people from Great Britain and New Zealand and Australia, they type to me about the gun laws where they're at. And they try to make it sound like things are better there than they are here. They might be. You want to look at population size, though. You want to look at how many murders are committed by knife. See, the homeless probably not going to be armed with a handgun. Most of my friends who are homeless who died did not die of a weapon. They died of exposure to the elements because of bad laws that dehumanize us. But between getting shot and getting stabbed, I've had a lot more friends that have been stabbed. A lot more. I've also stepped in between a lot of people with knives and the people they were trying to stab, whereas standing in front of somebody with a gun who's intent on shooting somebody else, I actually have not had that experience. I've stood in front of a gun to defend a dog, but I've never had to do so for a human being. I know a lot of people are dead. A lot of people in my personal life are dead. Mobley broke his neck. He's one of my friends who was stabbed in 2014. He broke his neck earlier this year and he's no longer with us. Mobley was an EMT. He wanted to join the military, even as old as he is in life. He wanted to join the military to save lives. He doesn't agree with our government. He doesn't agree with the wars, but he still wanted to save lives. A lot of people tried using my political views and political opinions as an excuse to harm me. Many officers did this after doing terrible things to me that they get away with. They feel comfortable doing these things because they get away with them. Kind of like that guy who raped Christine Kelly. He got off scot-free. And the woman that he raped, well, what happened to her? He's free to go out and rape somebody again and again and again. Just like the example of Waylon Lolatai. After assaulting me, nobody did anything. Least of all, not Darren O'Connor. What happened after that? Well, Waylon Lolatai assaulted 6 more people in 2018. How about Clearview Behavioral Health? I told on them. They killed a man not long after I tried telling on them. I got treated like I was schizophrenic and making it all up and hallucinating it. And then what do they get closed down for? Exactly the same things I spoke out about. If you guys don't want to arm the Taliban, I understand. I don't want to arm the Taliban either. But then again, there's a much bigger terrorist organization than the Taliban. And that terrorist organization is the United States government. The United States government does not serve anyone's interests but their own. The United States government has created laws to protect United States government employees when they break the law. That's right. Illegal don't exactly mean illegal. It means, hey, let's look at the criteria. Is this a male or a female this is happening to? Is it a white person or a black person? Is this a Christian or a Muslim? Is this a rich person or a broke person? Now, I keep trying to do things the legal way, and obviously, law enforcement has done everything in their power to prevent that from happening. Same thing with the Bollinger family. I keep hearing about how great the United States is. It's not. Adolf Hitler was going to make Germany great again. That didn't work too good, did it? How great were they? Look at the things that they did on the Eastern Front and tell me how good they were. Look at what they did at Dachau and Auschwitz and tell me how great Nazi Germany was. Now, here's the problem with going along with a regime like that. At the beginning of the war, there was a lot of people who supported the Nazi Party. There were a lot more Germans who just didn't give a fuck. They weren't Nazis, but they just didn't care because they weren't black, they weren't communist, they weren't Jewish. So why should they care? And by the end of the war, when the Russians were at the gates of Berlin, we got Nazi SS death heads walking through Berlin, shooting German citizens, forcing German citizens to dig trenches and ditches and tank works. By the end of the war, the Germans did to their own people everything that they had done to Jews and blacks, and of course, Belgians. Some of y'all have heard of Amsterdam. What's it famous for? Prostitution, drugs, the red light district. Something you might not know about Amsterdam. The story of Anne Frank that took place in Amsterdam. In World War II, the Nazis gave the Belgian college students two choices. Choice number one, you can basically go along with the Nazi rhetoric and speak out publicly that you support it. Or if you don't support the Nazi rhetoric, you go to a forced labor camp run by Fritz Sauckel, who had absolutely no regard for human life. After the war, we set up most of the United States on ideas taken from Nazi Germany. And the strange thing about that is that Nazi Germany originally got those ideas from us. Nazi Germany took the forced labor camps from an American idea made after the Civil War. It's called a chain gang. After the Civil War, there were about 4 million homeless black people in the South. And so the South, not wanting to give up their monopoly on slavery, and the United States government making the 13th Amendment. Mind you, this is the amendment that was supposed to free all slaves, right? Except that it didn't. It left a loophole. Slavery is illegal unless you are convicted of a crime. It doesn't specify what kind of crime. It could be a misdemeanor. It could be jaywalking. Or it could be somebody who doesn't like you because you're black. I mean, who's really going to make these folks tell the truth anyway? So we got this issue now of the fact that most of the United States is set up on Nazi Germany's propaganda and bullshit. The things that they did with their media, we do with ours. Now, here in the US, we found a way to keep the taxpayers paying up for this. In Nazi Germany, they couldn't. There is no way by the end of the war that the citizens of Nazi Germany could pay for anything. But here in the United States, we tax the shit out of the poor to keep people incarcerated who don't belong there. People who stuck up for our rights. Ours. They didn't make it very far because they weren't using guns. I am against killing people, but I will never be against defending yourself. It's just unfortunate that the United States is making all Americans targets and is arming our enemies. Not that they haven't been doing that for the entirety of my life. I was born October 18th of 1980. Things were pretty bad then. They were doing the same thing then. Going up against the same people too. Russia and China. Sure, Vietnam was not China or Russia, was it? Same thing with Korea. That wasn't Russia or China, was it? But in both of those wars, that's why it's called a Cold War, they were always fighting through someone else, always a third world country. Russia is afraid to go head to head against the United States, and the United States, rightly so, is afraid to go head to head against Russia. And the situation with China isn't much different. We've had embargoes and sanctions against China for the entirety of my life, and yet everything still says made in fucking China. Makes sense to me. No, the fuck it doesn't. Y'all stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Be safe.